Chapter 14. After the set, I threw aside all pretense of circulating the crowd, making a rather obvious beeline to the back table where Keith sat waiting, very much alone, his big body testing the limits of a pale pink button-down shirt. Glad you could make it, I said, straddling a chair and doing my level best to appear nonchalant through the growing desire to suck on Keith's lower lip. Easy, boy. Down, boy. Sorry I was late, he said. Small domestic problem. Your girlfriend? Betsy, wasn't it? Look at me. Mr. Friendly concerns himself. Yeah. He combed a hand through his hair. Biceps threatened the seams of his shirt. Gee, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope my nose wasn't growing noticeably. Thanks. He smiled a small, wry half-smile. Even that was sexy. I needed some air. Actually, I think this relationship is on its last leg anyways. You know how it is. Sure. I know how what is. Having a big blonde Brunhilde of a girlfriend? Having a relationship? Having a relationship on its last leg? I knew how none of the above was, except for an abortive 2-week shack-up with Zaz, this rather kinky alto sax player. Remember? When I was 19, my experience with long-term romantic relationships was nil. What say we change the subject, okay? Can I buy you a drink? Boy, where had I heard that opening before? Thanks. I'm not much for alcohol. I could use some food, though. Okay, then. Could I buy you a late dinner? Or an early breakfast or something? Well, I was just going over to Cafe Santa Monica for some steak and eggs. Until I said that, I was really planning to take Louis home and remove his clothing with my teeth. The steak and eggs idea just sprang full-grown, like Athena from the top of my head. Like some company? I was at a loss for a tasteful way to express just how much I'd like some of his company, and probably would have said something embarrassing had Snooky not appeared, seemingly out of the none-too-thin air, leaning over my back and extending his hand to Keith. Well, good evening, Snooky crooned, gushing like an open fire hydrant. I'm Sid Rothenberg, keyboards and musical director. Good evening. As Keith took Snooky's hand, I couldn't help checking to see if he'd held Snooky's hand as long as he'd held mine. I decided he hadn't. Snooky, this is Keith Keller, I said, looking up at Snooky with a glance that said, back off, buddy, or I'll break your collarbone. Snooky read me loud and clear. Excuse me. Snooky took me by the arm and addressed Keith in his best Roz Russell, might I borrow the diva for just a minute, business, you know. Snooky herded me toward the opposite end of the room. Well, well, my dear, this is definitely your week, isn't it? I am afraid I don't know what you mean, I lied. Oh, come on, honey. Okay, you got me. But I just don't know, Snooks. You don't know what? I'm still not sure he isn't straight. I mean, he's got this girlfriend. Are you kidding? The way he looks at you? My heart did the splits. You noticed it too? From across the room. I turned and grabbed a quick glance at Keith. Our eyes met and exchanged warm greetings. He smiled. Maybe I was right. Maybe there was, yes, in those pretty little hazel eyes. I mean, really, Snooky said. Some people do have all the luck. First little Louis, and now this. He leaned in and whispered, call me first thing in the morning. I want the details. And your leftovers. But that's not why I stole you away. There's somebody who wants to meet you. She's a little strange. He lowered his voice. But be nice to her. She says she has some TV connections, and she may be of some help. So smile pretty and turn on the charm. Snooky led me to the table where sat a small dishwater blonde woman. She could have been 30 or 40. She was wearing an undistinguished beige dress barely containing a set of bazooms God had obviously meant for a much larger woman. She smiled from one end of the room to the other. I hadn't noticed her during the sets, but then my mind had been on other things. Johnny Ray Russo, Snooky said. This is Marcia Goldman. How do you do? The woman greeted in a rather nasal voice laced with the New York accent. She stood, offering a tiny manicured hand. She must have been all of 4'11" in spike heels. How do you do? I replied. How do you do? I replied, wondering just who this little dame might fancy herself to be. Miss Goldman is with the Sloan Agency, Snooky explained as if in answer. The third largest entertainment PR firm in the country, Marcia injected. Or is it the fourth? Anyways, I simply adore your work, Mr. Rousseau. Johnny, I offered, hoping I hadn't snatched from the company of the divine Mr. K just to hear some sawed-off Sue Mengers tell me she simply adored my work. Johnny, Marcia intoned slowly, as if trying it on for size and deciding whether or not I should change it. Johnny. Anyway, Johnny, I realize at this stage of your career you really have no use for a firm of the size of Sloan. However, I personally do know some rather influential people in this business. She paused for dramatic effect. And I'd really love to help you if I possibly can. You are a very talented young man. I'd just love to someday be able to say I helped you along. It's the manager in me. Mind if I smoke? She asked, firing up a lavender cigarette with flowers printed around the filter end. Not at all, I lied. Manager, huh? Anyways, I suppose Sydney told you that I have some connections with the Griffin Show. Sydney, I glanced at Snooky, who gave me a now be good look in return. Well, Marcia continued, I think it might be a very good thing for you. You'd go over big. I called a friend of mine at the show to see if he might get here for your second or third set, but unfortunately, as is so often the case with television people, he was tied up and couldn't make it. But not to worry, he promised he'd come to see you in the very near future, and I intend to get him here if I have to hog tie him. I wasn't at all sure whether or not the little lady was talking through her hat. I'd had enough professional bullshitters promise me superstardom on the rocks that I was immediately skeptical of anyone who claimed to have connections. You know, Mrs. Goldman. Marcia, she insisted. Marcia, you know I'm not exactly in the market for a manager. Oh, I know. Sidney's already told me he's managed you so far, and I'm sure he's done a fine job. But let's face it, kids, on your own you've gotten this. She made a gesture with her cigarette hand that took in Tom Sawyer and all of its questionable glory. I can get you the Griffin Show. Says you, I thought. You're not convinced, she observed correctly. I understand. Why should you be? What do you know for me? Look, let's just do this. You just see whether or not I can do anything for you. And if I can, then we'll talk about details and contracts and my 10%. Just like, you should pardon the expression, a drug deal. The first one's free. How about it? Have we got a deal? What did I have to lose? Deal. I shook Marcia's tiny, surprisingly strong hand. I appreciate your interest in me. Your talent, Johnny, Marcia said, as if disclosing a secret. I like talent. Besides, I think you and I can make some money together. I'm sorry tonight didn't work out, but you know how it is. Uh-huh. I certainly was getting a lot of credit for knowing how it was. Anyways, I have your number and Sydney has mine. We'll keep in touch. So nice to meet you, Johnny, Marcia said, gearing up to leave. Well, good night, all. I'll walk you to your car, Snooky offered. Thank you, Sydney. You know a girl can't be any too careful these days. And they were gone, a flurry of words in their wake.